Mohammed, it is just a few mindless racists, isn't it? I mean, it's not the media's fault.
No, I think the media have got a huge responsibility when it comes to reporting these issues. You talk about facts, it's not about facts. If you look at the Mumbai terrorist attacks in 2008, we heard every single newspaper in the aftermath, the day after, reporting that British Muslims were involved. Less than 10 hours later, it was the other way. There was no single British Muslim involved. No apologies, no retractions, and the whole community demonised. The media have got a huge role to play, and I think they've got a responsible position on this.
OK, well, that is the question for our vote. Is the media stirring up hatred of Muslims here? If you think it is, then text the word vote followed by yes. If you disagree, text vote followed by no. Our text number is 81771 and texts will be charged at your standard message rate. This week you can also vote online on our website. For full terms and conditions, visit bbc.co.uk/Sunday Morning Live. We'll show you how you voted at the end of the programme. And we know stories like the example of the Mumbai attacks. There is a problem, isn't there, in reporting?
There's a problem with the Mumbai attacks were very difficult to get the facts quickly. I agree. Newspapers are always making mistakes. But when people say, I blame the media for all of this, it's such an easy excuse. There's also a misunderstanding of the nature of newspapers and news stories. They are about what is unusual. What happens most of the time in London, I live in inner London, is there are Muslim shopkeepers, and no problem at all, because we don't then report, well, the vast majority of Muslims in this country go about their lives not getting on anybody's nerves. All they're doing is what their non-Muslim friends and neighbours, and indeed, people go and buy things from their shops.
Well, Mohammed, take that on specifically. That's news is the
yes,
unusual.
What is unusual?
The moral, ethical question is: should journalists be reporting facts? I mean, you refer to that in your open piece.
That was a mistake, yes, okay.
Well, I wouldn't class that as a mistake. If you look at the newspaper headlines today about the 14 arrests we've had over the last few days, we've had 3 or 4 different versions in 3 or 4 different newspapers. So there's a lot of speculation. There's a lot, in some cases, making it up, and that's not good. And when you see terrorist suspects who are arrested and then released without charge, there's a huge impact on community relations. And all I'm saying is, I work as a journalist. I'm involved in the media, and sometimes it's too easy to blame the media. But if you read the Mail, for example, there seems to be an anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim story pretty much every single day in the newspapers.
Well,
the Daily Star's the same as well.
Let Anne respond to that.
Yes, I just feel that. Sorry, I'm spluttering. Muslims have actually, they've lived here for yonks, no problem at all. The only problem was that a jihadist element started up. So, of course, if you wait until all the facts are there, and you don't always get the facts, then people say, oh, you're covering up for this.
And it's not to do with that, it's to do with the slippery slope.
If you cover up things, gossip and everything actually makes things worse.
OK, I want to bring in Simon here, because terrorism is news at the moment. And what do you make of the argument, well, those terrorist suspects happen to be Muslim, and that's, as Anne says, the legitimate reason for speculation?
The terrorism is news at the moment. Most people are aware that only a small minority of Muslims are sympathetic to terrorism. And as Anne says, the news reports things that are unusual. However, I do think that while the blame for racist attacks lies with the racists who commit them primarily, nonetheless, the media have to behave responsibly. And what we do see is some papers, not all the media, but some papers turn stories into Muslim stories when they're not about Islam. So to give you an example, a couple of years ago, it had been a local news story originally about a swimming pool where, because of a lack of frosted glass on the bottom screens, a few people had complained, particularly women customers at the swimming pool, that people were sort of standing outside and looking in at them in their bathing costumes. And some of the people who'd complained happened to be Muslim, not all of them at all. A couple of newspapers ran this story.
I don't think the Mail did.
I don't
But
think it was.
But the papers picked it out as a Muslim's complaint.
As Muslims demand that lights be turned off in swimming pool, Muslims demand that a swim in darkness. It was nothing to do with Islam. The facts are exaggerated. because Islam is in the news, it's a convenient scapegoat.
But who put Islam in the news?
Exactly. I mean, I just
It
want to
was
ask Mohammed.
put into the news by the extremists.
Well, I
But
see this
doesn't
is the
remove
problem. There's a
the
slippery slope.
responsibility.
But are you not supposed to report arrests because it upsets Muslims?
What I'm saying to you, Samir, is I'm opposed to terrorism. I've been campaigning, and as thousands of Muslim organisations in this country, against terrorism, extremism. The headlines in your newspaper, for example, the Mail and the Star, and some of the other right-wing newspapers, has been an anti-Muslim story. So if it's not halal meat, it's the way women dress. If it's not the way women dress, it's Muslims want to do away with Christmas.
Well, let's get into integration in a minute.
Let's get the facts clear. The facts are not about
Can I just bring in one thing
extremism,
before
Actually,
terrorism,
on the
or
latter,
jihadis, or terrorism. It's to do with the fact that
latter
Muslims
thing about abolishing Christmas was in one particular newspaper, and it was rebutted, and the rebuttal was printed. So,
Okay.
I'm not saying the newspapers are
It
wonderful.
shouldn't even be printed in the first place, and that's a problem.
Well, there's a whole issue about how you print apologies. I want to bring in a contributor on I think it's on the phone. It's Fiaz Mughal from the Tell Mama helpline. Now, this is the charity that you did research. Go ahead, Anne.
Yes, just simply, all around the world, the main victims of violence are women, of whatever sect, whatever age. So, in a way, this is a problem of men and women, and this happens in Muslim countries. The only time I have nearly been raped was actually in a Muslim country by a so-called devout Muslim. So violence against women is all over the world. It's not always...
Your newspaper doesn't feel the need to print these stories. When women are attacked in the streets, they're verbally abused. Yet they're very quick to print anti-Muslim stories. I mean, this is the problem from an ethical and a moral point of view that I base my argument on. Is that we've got to, these women, and I've met some of these victims across the country who've been spat at and been verbally abused, and we would just like to see the same anger and frustration from our politicians.
One of the main problems is that you have a terrorist component. No, hang on. If you have a terrorist component, a small one, in any group. Now, I'm old enough to have lived in London through the IRA bombings. A friend of mine was killed in the Harrods bomb. And I live quite near a very Irish area with Irish pubs. Irish people, most of whom have been here for yonks, they're not. They just enjoy their Guinness and all the rest of it and sing Irish songs. But they found they were terribly discriminated against, and they would be spat at, you bombers and things. Now that's all stopped. They don't bother.
But the fact that something's happened before isn't an excuse.
No, it just shows. No, of course, it's not an excuse. But the man who recently tore off a woman's niqab and made her, feel terrible. He was a bloke who'd been on cannabis, which is an extremely paranoid-inducing thing. B, he was upset and angry because his girlfriend had left him. And C, and to a certain extent I have sympathy, the niqab is in itself, I'm afraid, an aggressive act. It says, I want
explain why.
I want nothing to do with your society. Now, I know my society is pretty awful in many ways, but it says no.
It's extremely difficult to sit next to a woman, a very successful woman, who tries to criticise the right of women to choose how they dress.
Well, my God, Islam is full of that.
Well, it is, absolutely, and I agree with you. But there's a difference between pressurised and when people are going out on the streets and spitting at women who wear the niqab, pulling these niqabs off and putting excrement on their faces.
But that's what's happening. It's just an excuse by thugs who might be doing other crimes.
I think if you listen to what Anne says on her third point, it tells you that it's a bit more than endorsement of that behaviour.
Evidence for the media's role in hate crime, and
of course it's wrong.
Not just with Islam, but for example, in the last couple of years, the right-wing press have had a stream of stories about disabled so-called scroungers, people supposedly claiming disability benefit when they're not entitled to it. Various NGOs, disability NGOs such as Scope, have said that hate crime, insults in the street, verbal abuse against disabled people has gone up very
So you're saying
sharply
it's part of a wider
at the
picture
same
of
time.
media-fueled
Well,
intolerance?
it does suggest that when the
Okay.
media pick out a group to scapegoat, hate crime goes
I
up.
just want to bring in another contributor on social media, actually. Well, we've got Robert West from on social media, actually. Well, we've got Robert West from the BNP, who's on the phone. We've heard this evidence suggesting that a lot of these rather nasty attacks on women are being carried out by men who have sympathies with your party. Sounds like mindless racism to me.
Well, Islam is a religion, it's not a race, and obviously if people have got issues in this way, behaving in this way with members of the community, we wouldn't support that, we wouldn't encourage it, we wouldn't endorse it. In the British National Party, we are in for educating the public about the true nature of Islam and organising proper and legitimate political opposition to the Islamification of Britain.
Well,
Just before you respond, I just want to bring in Fayaz from the helpline. Oh, we've lost him. Go ahead, Mohammed.
Robert has this narrow-minded view about these. The majority of attacks that are being carried out by sympathisers within his party. It's a fascist, racist ideology that violates human dignity. And Mr. West is a shining example of that. We've got to be very careful in how we deal with these issues. I'm not one. I'm a believer in freedom of speech in a liberal democracy, and we've got to have a good debate. But endorsing the abuse of women is just not acceptable.
Robert isn't saying that.
He's putting a PR spin on it, totally disassociating himself from that. But the actions speak louder than words.
I just want to bring in another contributor. We have someone
in the area that I was living in at that time.
I'm sorry.
So it was very clear there was anti-Muslim. It was very clear that my hijab was being pulled off and the burqa was being ripped off.
No, Jahan, thank you very much for coming on and sharing that story with us. I mean, it is an appalling tale, Anne, and you can see why for women like
all
her,
attacks like that are appalling.
they feel there's
why
a
is this
connection
not
to a
given
wider
as
picture.
much? Why is
Go ahead,
the
Simon.
attack on this?
Well, I mean, I assume it has been,
vicious
because
attack,
I
and it's a
don't
terrible
know.
story. Why is this
But,
not in the media?
I mean, what puzzles me slightly is your hijab is your headscarf. Were you wearing a burqa in your home at the same time, which covers your entire face? Oh,
No, I don't think she was. The whole thing is she wasn't wearing.
Well,
should it make a difference?
Yes, because this is the trouble. I mean, I have worked in the Middle East a lot, some of it undercover. I was born in a Muslim country, Pakistan. It wasn't Pakistan then. When I go to Iran or Saudi, I have to wear the full bin bag outfit. I'm obliged to do that. Now, it seems to me that if you wear a burqa or a niqab, you can't see any face. It makes people slightly alarmed because they think these people
I think you've made that point, Anne.
I think we're going
because we're running out
She
of
was
time.
not wearing a burqa, she was wearing a hijab. But whatever she was wearing, the attack was disgusting. Of course it was. I don't think any newspaper would say, oh, wonderful, stick up for white men attacking women.
I'm sure we see these stories in the newspapers. We don't see these stories.
Depends
We
on the
don't.
ones
With
you
respect,
read.
with respect, we don't. And if it was an anti-Muslim story, then it would be front page news on the Daily Mail in particular.
I do want to let Robert West of the BNP respond on this. What do you say to Noor Jahan, who recounted that appalling attack on her?
Well, obviously,
Would you condemn it?
We're not in favour of crime.
Would you condemn it?
No, of course not. We would condemn.
You would condemn the crime?
Of course we would. I mean, the problem of Islam has to be dealt with politically, rather than in the way that certain members of the EDL or certain people who have various views, who have seen the danger of Islam, but they're not reacting to it in the appropriate political way that they should.
Robert, thank you very much.
Robert's rhetoric about the danger of Islam only helps to fuel these attacks. Viewers will have seen Robert West in that picture wearing a dog collar because he claims to be a priest. No denomination has ever claimed him. He won't confirm which church he was ever ordained in. And I think it's important, people having seen that picture...
Well, we haven't introduced Ms Reverend, and I want to move it on and keep it on the discussion. I mean, briefly, I'd just like to ask, is there an issue here about politicians, actually? Was it politically correct to not talk about crimes and issues about integration? And, I mean, Rochdale is a great example of it. People felt a problem was ignored because no one wanted to stir up sensitivities in Muslims.
Well, you know, Samira, I live in Rochdale. Unlike commentators who've come in and passed judgment on that town, I was born in that town and still live in that town.
But do you think
now.
there's been a problem with, you know,
no, I think there's two issues. I mean, I think the
it's
Rochdale
not a religious one, it's a cultural one.
I think the Rochdale thing is a completely different debate, maybe for another day. But I think you are right that we've got to. If you look at integration, we've had an opinion poll, a report only in the last few days. Muslims are more integrated, more passionate, more patriotic, more British than their white counterparts. So I think celebrating our differences is something which is good, but we've got to be strong in holding values that bind us together.
Anne, that's what you...
Yes, I was just going to say, what I really dislike about going on programmes like this, you always have the nutters from both sides, like Anjum Chowdhury.
I hope you don't see me as a nutter.
No, you are wonderful
to do that
because the
today.
Ramadan Foundation is a sensible lot, but, you know, because of this idea, we must get a row going. So you have Anjum Chowdhury, apparently speaking for Muslims.
Not
which
on
he
this
doesn't.
programme,
No,
Anne.
I've been on one of these with.
We're giving you the last word on this.
BNP and EDL, they are no more representative of
Well, they're
white.
representative of issues around the extremes, aren't they? Which is what we're discussing.
Yes, I know, but, you know, we encourage them. We give them enormous
Okay, well,
amounts
there's
of...
an issue there about media exposure, perhaps. Thank you. Very briefly, a couple of your discussion by Terry Prone, author of Mirror, Mirror, Confessions of a Plastic Surgery Addict. Now, you've also been an advisor, haven't you, to several Irish prime ministers, so you're kind of a very successful woman in your career too. Tell me what made you decide to have all these procedures and how many have you had?
Oh, I couldn't count how many I've had at this stage. What made me decide was that I had a fantastic car crash, a really spectacular job, 50 miles an hour, 2 cars. The other car was so much bigger than mine that it reduced my car to 160 quid's worth of scrap metal, and me along with it. Everything I had was broken other than my right arm. My face was crushed. And about 6 months after the accident, when I was in a wheelchair, was the first time that I actually saw my face in a mirror, because if you're in a wheelchair, you're not at the level of mirrors. And what looked back at me was not my face. It was completely different. It was lopsided, it was obviously scarred and damaged. And much later, I began to look at the possibility of restructuring my face, a cheek implant, which involved a modified facelift, and then to remove a huge scar on my forehead, a brow lift. And then I noticed, gosh, this has odd spin-offs. The brow lift removed the fact that my forehead looked like a ploughed field, which I thought was some advantage. Now, I had always been of the view that plastic surgery was something that pampered American women did to please their menfolk. And I suddenly was thinking, now, this is very interesting. It's much more like going to the dentist. You don't take pride in the fact that your teeth are rotting from age. You get them fixed. And so any time that something began to bother me, like, for example, when the ploughed field began to recur, I had Botox injections.
So you didn't feel like I've fixed myself, I've done the reconstruction, I need to just age gracefully now? You didn't think
Well,
that?
what is aging gracefully? Leaning happily into wattles and wrinkles. I don't know about you, but in 20 years' time, I don't think you'll be complimented when somebody comes up to you and says, Samira, your wrinkles are fantastic.
Ask me in 20 years.
No, it just does not happen. No, the thing about the Botox was, I thought, I'll try this. And then the most magical thing of all happened. My regular migraine headaches that I'd had recurring every 2 weeks after the car crash went away. So to me, plastic surgery with caveats is a great thing.
Mohammed.
Well, you know,
Separate of the reconstruction.
yes, Terry's story is slightly different to most cases because of the car crash, and I think there's a legitimate argument on moral grounds that that you have plastic surgery. What worries me is that we live in a society that is over-sexualized. We have padded bras from a very young age. We have teenage magazines that talk about perfection in terms of male and female, and more children and young people are choosing a path of plastic surgery, and I think that's quite dangerous. And I think, you know, as a Muslim, I speak as a Muslim, that you should be grateful for health, and you should be happy with the way God has created you.
Anne, have you ever thought about
Well, I'm not happy the way God created me. But
Well, we can't all be happy, can we?
no, I mean, I look like a Galapagos taught us.
You look like a woman of experience.
Yes, which is a nice way of saying covered in wrinkles and all that. I have nothing against people doing a bit of nip and tucking.
Have you ever considered it?
No, because actually it wasn't possible with my job, because I was a foreign correspondent, a war correspondent. I admit I didn't lead a healthy life, smoking 10 years ago. It's just a little bit late, you know.
You found a responsible surgeon who said, no, I'm not going to give you Botox.
But he knew I was a journalist, and of course that might make him a bit nervous. No, I don't think I wear my wrinkles with pride. You know, I'd rather they weren't there. But what I find really depressing is that young women who don't need either Botox or any kind of lift, and I haven't been in a car crash like you, feel that unless they look like these airbrushed creatures,
it's interesting,
that,
isn't it?
you know, they have no self-esteem. Get a life, get some self-esteem.
I want to actually take the argument that way, because joining us on webcam, I think we have, and you make a lot of money after encouraging it.
No, it's not violent. This is a normal industry. We make normal profits.
I think it's slightly unfair to just blame John. I think just before you get to John, and John is the end process, there are magazines, there's wider society, there are shops that going to take more responsibility. You know, we have this perfection. If you look at males, they've got to have a six-pack, they've got to have these muscles, they've got to be lean. And if you look at,
do you feel pressured, Mohammed?
I personally don't. No, I keep healthy as possibly as I can. But if you look at that, there's teenage magazines. I mean, I was reading one the other day in a newsagent whilst waiting for a train. You know, it's ridiculous that how young we've sexualised our children, and I think that's a contributing factor not only to the case in Rochdale, but more and more cases of sexual violence against
you're a
women.
Woman, you're not a very, very young woman. Do you think there's a difference? Is it getting more extreme with young women? They want not just a breast implant, but a fake-looking one, a huge one.
I think that there's a real problem. There's two real problems about cosmetic surgery at the moment. One is the absolute lack of regulation, which is outrageous and extremely dangerous for everybody. But the second thing then is the lack of any kind of parental control, because the notion that a teenager would be given as a present a breast implant is just astonishing, because teenagers have not fully formed, not just physically, but mentally, intellectually. They don't know who they are. The idea that a mother would say, you are not going to be perfect unless you have false breasts implanted, that is quite shocking. I think that there is a hell of a difference between cosmetic surgery, and I deeply disagree with Julia, her suggestion that it is violence against women. It is a chosen procedure and it isn't violent. Secondly, she talked about profit being made by cosmetic. Now, clearly profit is made, but that is like saying, well, we shouldn't take pharmaceutical preparations that will save our lives because the pharmaceutical companies make profits.
Well, I suppose
profit
it's the idea
is not
of extra selling. And I mean, the PIP scandal with the breast implants was that it was kept secret from women for a long time after questions were raised.
Yes, obviously, because well, that was a completely criminal thing.
Was aberrant behaviour.
It was deceiving the regulators, if you remember. And criminal behaviour, I'm afraid, occurs everywhere. The only thing I would say, and you know, obviously I wear enormous amounts of slap, because I don't like the look of me. But, you know, the beauty industry is not a new thing. I mean, ancient Greece, I mean, everybody has said, oh, a beautiful woman has a greater chance in life. In the days when you get married, you had to get a rich man.
You're living proof that, you know, you don't regard yourself as a great beauty.
Wait a second, the reality
you're successful in your own right, aren't you?
I am hugely successful, thank you very much.
Did you need the surgery? Very briefly.
And furthermore, one of the areas that I'm successful in is writing books. I've written 26 books. If you write books, it doesn't matter if you have the back end of a truck.
So it's just about confidence?
No, it isn't just about confidence.
Very briefly,
it is absolutely not. It's first of all about continuing to look like yourself. No more and no less.
I'm really
not for
sorry
anybody
we have
else.
to leave it there, but thank you all so much. We have to end it there because your text and online poll votes are in, and we asked, is the media stirring up hatred of Muslims? Here's what you told us. 37% of those of you who voted said yes, it is, and 63% say no, media coverage isn't stirring up hatred of Muslims. Just wondered what you made of that, Mohammed?
Well, I don't think I've ever been on a programme where the opinion poll is on the side of Muslims. And so, yeah, that's the challenge. We've got to get out and we've got to visualise, put the crimes that are being committed against young Muslims across this country, the language that is used by people like Anne.
What language?
We've got to be more responsible. You know, bin bag suggestions that were made.
I'm somebody who had to wear these things.
I think it's quite offensive to women. It's quite offensive to women. Let me finish my point, Samira. I think it's quite offensive if you go out there to women who choose to wear the niqab and choose to wear the hijab to be described as bin bag. I think it's quite offensive to a lot of free women out there.
Okay. First of all, I think I'm questioning how much is free choice. I'm not saying their men are making them do it, but because they want to announce their religion. I don't like anyone announcing their religion in the public sphere. In a way, this is about integration, do you think, and about just kind of being part of British society? I find it very upsetting to go to a Muslim primary school and see little girls in veils. They all grow up thinking they have to wear them.
I think it's quite upsetting for young Muslim women out there who choose to wear the niqab, who choose to, wear the headscarf.
Why do they choose?
I think your language, is contributing to that atmosphere. And I just think, with the utmost respect to you, you've got to be more responsible in the language that you choose. Yes, you've got a position that is against the niqab.
There's terrorism cases, there's...
Yes, but that's got nothing whatsoever to do
with wearing a particular garment. The fact is that there are many people in our society who are deeply offended to see young women going around with naked midriffs. But we have to learn tolerance of everybody and their clothes.
That's a good note to end it on. I'm sorry we don't have some more time for this, but thanks to all of you who've taken part today.